If you fall asleep, 412 people die. Daniel Walker did not answer right away. He stared at the blinking warning light above the maintenance hatch, trying to decide whether the voice in his earpiece belonged to Dr. Claire Bennett or the one his exhausted mind had invented. The red emergency beacon pulsed every 2 seconds. Somewhere below him, deep inside Orpheus Station, hundreds of alien delegates lay motionless in their mandatory sleep cycle, completely unaware that the oxygen backup system had stopped responding. Daniel pulled himself another foot through the narrow ventilation shaft, his elbows scraping against cold alloy panels. His hands shook so badly, he almost dropped the wrench. He had been awake for 86 hours. At least that was what his watch claimed. The numbers blurred every time he looked at them. "Dan, answer me." Claire's voice returned, sharper this time. "Can you still hear me?" He swallowed hard before pressing the transmit button. "Yeah." His voice sounded dry, almost unfamiliar. "Still here. How many fingers am I holding up?" He closed his eyes and let out a tired laugh. "Claire, you're on the radio." There was silence for a moment before she sighed. "Good. You still know I'm not standing in front of you." Daniel smiled for half a second. Then the smile disappeared as another voice drifted through the darkness. "Dad." It was soft, young, familiar. "Dad, you forgot Sunday again." His heart stopped. "Lily." He froze inside the shaft. The tiny flashlight mounted to his helmet illuminated nothing except pipes and cables stretching into darkness, but he could have sworn he heard small footsteps somewhere behind him. "Lily," he whispered. No answer, just the steady hum of failing machinery. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut until they hurt. "She isn't here," he muttered to himself. "She's 34 light years away." He reached into the chest pocket of his work jacket and wrapped his fingers around the old stainless steel watch his daughter had given him before he left Earth. The scratched metal felt real. The memory felt real. The voice was not. "Dan." Claire came back over the radio. "Talk to me." "I'm okay." "No, you're not." She didn't hesitate. "You're hallucinating again." Daniel leaned his forehead against the cold metal wall of the shaft. She was right. The station seemed to breathe around him now. Shadows stretched where there were no lights. Straight pipes curved at impossible angles whenever he looked too quickly. Every instinct told him to stop moving, close his eyes for just 5 minutes, and let someone else handle the problem. But there was no one else. Every other species aboard Orpheus depended on scheduled neurological shutdowns. During those sleep cycles, they were almost impossible to wake safely. If the oxygen failed before the backup reactors came online, hundreds of families would never know anything had gone wrong. Daniel forced one trembling hand forward, then another. "Dan," Claire said quietly, "I need you to listen to me. If you keep going, you could suffer permanent neurological damage." He crawled another foot. "Maybe. You might not even remember your own name tomorrow." He stopped just long enough to catch his breath. "That's tomorrow." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "They need air right now." The warning timer flashed across the small display mounted inside the shaft. 18 minutes remaining. Daniel tightened his grip on the wrench and disappeared deeper into the darkness, unaware that 4 days earlier this had all begun with nothing more dangerous than a cup of cold coffee, a routine maintenance request, and one alien scientist asking a simple question no human had ever thought twice about. "You people actually work without sleeping?" 4 days earlier, Daniel Walker stepped off the Earth transport carrying a dented metal toolbox in one hand and a paper cup of cold coffee in the other. The docking bay of Orpheus Station looked less like a military installation and more like a spotless research campus, quiet enough that his work boots echoed across the polished floor. A welcome drone floated beside him and projected a glowing path toward customs. Daniel ignored it long enough to finish the last sip of coffee. "You know that tastes terrible now, right?" Dr. Claire Bennett said as she caught up beside him. Daniel shrugged. "It is still coffee." Claire smiled. "That is the most engineer thing I have heard all week." Daniel smiled back for only a second before opening his work order on the handheld screen. 3 failed oxygen regulators. 2 pressure valves outside safety limits. 1 backup circulation system that had been flagged 6 months earlier and somehow never repaired. "Looks like somebody kept hitting postpone," he muttered. Claire glanced at the report. "Politics. Nobody wants to shut down a station this important for maintenance. Machines do not care about politics. Neither do electrical fires." They walked together through the central corridor where delegates from dozens of alien civilizations crossed paths in peaceful silence. Some were nearly 8 feet tall. Others barely reached Daniel's shoulder. Every one of them wore the same silver identification band around the wrist, marking the time remaining before their mandatory sleep cycle. Daniel noticed the countdowns without saying anything. A young technician with violet skin yawned and excused herself before leaving for the sleep chambers exactly on schedule. Another delegate checked his wrist display and immediately ended a conversation mid-sentence because his neurological rest period had begun. Everything on Orpheus revolved around sleep. Everything except the humans. Is it true? Someone asked behind him. Daniel turned to see an older alien scientist approaching with calm, curious eyes. His silver-blue skin reflected the overhead lights like polished stone. Dr. Nathan Cole, the translator announced politely. Nathan extended a hand in the human custom he had clearly practiced. I hope you do not mind the question. I have been looking forward to meeting someone from Earth. Daniel shook his hand. Depends on the question. Nathan smiled. Your personnel records show you worked 31 consecutive hours during an emergency power failure on Luna Station several years ago. Daniel nodded. Sounds about right. Nathan tilted his head. How did your supervisors keep you awake? Daniel looked genuinely confused. Nobody kept me awake. Then why did you continue working? Daniel blinked once. Because the station needed power. Nathan stared at him as though he had misunderstood the translation. Before he could ask another question, another figure entered the corridor. Director Marcus Vale carried himself with quiet confidence, his white research coat perfectly pressed, his expression unreadable. He greeted Daniel warmly, complimented Earth's engineering reputation, and thanked him for accepting the maintenance contract. His voice was calm enough to lower everyone's guard. Then his eyes drifted to the unfinished repair report in Daniel's hand. Those oxygen systems concern you? Vale asked. They should concern everybody, Daniel answered. Vale nodded thoughtfully. Complete one small research study for us, Mr. Walker, and I will authorize immediate access to every restricted maintenance sector on this station. Claire looked at Daniel before speaking. You should read every page before agreeing. Daniel accepted the digital tablet without taking his eyes off Vale. The request seemed simple enough. Observe one human remaining awake under controlled conditions for 36 hours. No invasive procedures. No unnecessary risks. Standard medical monitoring throughout. Daniel looked back at the maintenance report showing another delay would push the repairs beyond the next station-wide sleep cycle. He exhaled slowly, pressed his thumb against the approval screen, and handed the tablet back. Neither he nor Claire noticed that after Daniel walked away, Marcus Vale quietly reopened the authorization file, erased the words 36 hours, and replaced them with a single instruction that nobody else in the room was meant to see. Continue observation until the subject can no longer choose for himself. 4 days earlier, Daniel Walker stepped off the Earth transport carrying a dented metal toolbox in one hand and a paper cup of cold coffee in the other. The docking bay of Orpheus Station looked less like a military installation and more like a spotless research campus, quiet enough that his work boots echoed across the polished floor. A welcome drone floated beside him and projected a glowing path toward customs. Daniel ignored it long enough to finish the last sip of coffee. You know that tastes terrible now, right? Dr. Claire Bennett said as she caught up beside him. Daniel shrugged. It is still coffee. Claire smiled. That is the most engineer thing I have heard all week. Daniel smiled back for only a second before opening his work order on the handheld screen. 3 failed oxygen regulators. 2 pressure valves outside safety limits. 1 backup circulation system that had been flagged 6 months earlier and somehow never repaired. Looks like somebody kept hitting postpone, he muttered. Claire glanced at the report. Politics. Nobody wants to shut down a station this important for maintenance. Machines do not care about politics. Neither do electrical fires. They walked together through the central corridor where delegates from dozens of alien civilizations crossed paths in peaceful silence. Some were nearly 8 feet tall. Others barely reached Daniel's shoulder. Every one of them wore the same silver identification band around the wrist, marking the time remaining before their mandatory sleep cycle. Daniel noticed the countdowns without saying anything. A young technician with violet skin yawned and excused herself before leaving for the sleep chambers exactly on schedule. Another delegate checked his wrist display and immediately ended a conversation mid-sentence because his neurological rest period had begun. Everything on Orpheus revolved around sleep. Everything except the humans. Is it true? Someone asked behind him. Daniel turned to see an older alien scientist approaching with calm, curious eyes. His silver-blue skin reflected the overhead lights like polished stone. Dr. Nathan Cole, the translator announced politely. Nathan extended a hand in the human custom he had clearly practiced. I hope you do not mind the question. I have been looking forward to meeting someone from Earth. Daniel shook his hand. Depends on the question. Nathan smiled. Your personnel records show you worked 31 consecutive hours during an emergency power failure on Luna Station several years ago. Daniel nodded. Sounds about right. Nathan tilted his head. How did your supervisors keep you awake? Daniel looked genuinely confused. Nobody kept me awake. Then why did you continue working? Daniel blinked once. Because the station needed power. Nathan stared at him as though he had misunderstood the translation. Before he could ask another question, another figure entered the corridor. Director Marcus Vale carried himself with quiet confidence, his white research coat perfectly pressed, his expression unreadable. He greeted Daniel warmly, complimented Earth's engineering reputation, and thanked him for accepting the maintenance contract. His voice was calm enough to lower everyone's guard. Then his eyes drifted to the unfinished repair report in Daniel's hand. Those oxygen systems concern you? Vale asked. They should concern everybody, Daniel answered. Vale nodded thoughtfully. Complete one small research study for us, Mr. Walker, and I will authorize immediate access to every restricted maintenance sector on this station. Claire looked at Daniel before speaking. You should read every page before agreeing. Daniel accepted the digital tablet without taking his eyes off Vale. The request seemed simple enough. Observe one human remaining awake under controlled conditions for 36 hours. No invasive procedures. No unnecessary risks. Standard medical monitoring throughout. Daniel looked back at the maintenance report showing another delay would push the repairs beyond the next station-wide sleep cycle. He exhaled slowly, pressed his thumb against the approval screen, and handed the tablet back. Neither he nor Claire noticed that after Daniel walked away, Marcus Vale quietly reopened the authorization file, erased the words 36 hours, and replaced them with a single instruction that nobody else in the room was meant to see. Continue observation until the subject can no longer choose for himself. Daniel slammed his palm against the edge of the observation table as the recording ended. His pulse pounded so hard that even the biometric sensors surrounding the room struggled to keep up. The voice had been perfect. Every pause, every laugh, every tiny crack in Lily's words. For one terrifying moment, he had believed his daughter was somewhere out there asking for help. He lowered his head and took one slow breath before speaking. Run it again. Director Marcus Vale folded his hands behind his back. You wish to hear it a second time? No. Daniel looked directly at him. I want to hear the part where my daughter calls me Dad. Vale nodded toward the control room. The recording started again. Lily cried softly. She begged for help. She sounded frightened. Daniel listened without blinking until the message ended. Then he quietly shook his head. That is not her. Nathan frowned. The voice print matches your personal recordings with 99.9% accuracy. That is because your computer copied her voice. Daniel tapped the side of his own head. It did not copy my daughter. Claire immediately looked toward Daniel. What gave it away? Daniel answered without hesitation. When Lily is scared, she does not call me Dad. She calls me Daddy. Every single time. The room fell completely silent. Vale stared at Daniel for several seconds before dismissing the recording with a wave of his hand. Interesting. Daniel slowly stood from the examination chair, but the room tilted sideways. He grabbed the edge of the table before falling. His vision doubled for an instant. Claire rushed toward him. Sit back down. I am fine. No, you are not. She checked the monitor attached to his wrist. Your reaction time is dropping. Your body is trying to force you to sleep. Daniel rubbed both eyes. The lights overhead seemed brighter than before. Somewhere behind him, he heard Lily laughing again, followed by footsteps running across a wooden porch that did not exist anywhere on Orpheus Station. He knew they were not real, but knowing did not make them disappear. Nathan quietly reviewed the latest neurological scans. Every graph pointed towards severe exhaustion, Yet Daniel continued answering complex engineering questions correctly whenever they involved machinery. His higher cognitive functions are slowing, Nathan said carefully. But procedural memory remains remarkably stable. Vale's eyes narrowed. Increase the environmental stress. Claire looked up immediately. No. Vale ignored her. The room temperature dropped several degrees. Bright white lights flooded the ceiling without warning. Low mechanical alarms began sounding from hidden speakers at irregular intervals. Every few minutes, another tone echoed from a different direction, making it impossible to predict where the next sound would come from. Daniel flinched once, but remained standing. This is unnecessary, Claire said sharply. The agreement was 36 hours under observation, not psychological pressure. Vale answered without raising his voice. Stress reveals truth. Claire stepped directly between Daniel and the observation glass. Stress destroys judgment. Before anyone could respond, red warning lights suddenly flashed throughout the research wing. An automated announcement echoed across the station. Attention! External magnetic disturbance detected. Backup stabilization protocols have been activated. Daniel looked toward the ceiling immediately. That timing is bad. Nathan checked another monitor. The primary oxygen regulators just switched to reserve power. Daniel grabbed his toolbox without waiting for permission. Then I need access to the maintenance level. Vale calmly blocked the exit door. Your participation in this study is not yet complete. Daniel stared at him for a long second, breathing heavily. People could lose life support. The station has redundant systems. Daniel took one step closer. Machines fail. Another alarm sounded, louder this time. Somewhere beyond the laboratory walls, emergency bulkheads began sealing one corridor after another. Claire reached for her security badge, while Nathan looked back and forth between the emergency display and Marcus Vale. For the first time since the study had begun, even Nathan could not tell whether the crisis outside was an unfortunate accident or exactly what the director had been waiting for. The laboratory doors sealed with a heavy metallic click that echoed through the entire corridor. Daniel instinctively reached for the emergency release, but the control panel flashed red before he could touch it. Access denied. Another warning tone rolled through Orpheus Station, lower this time, followed by a calm, automated voice. Primary oxygen regulation offline. Reserve circulation unavailable. Estimated environmental stability, 26 minutes. Daniel looked straight at Marcus Vale. You knew this was coming. Vale did not even blink. The station was built with multiple safeguards. Then why are they all failing at the same time? Claire stepped toward the nearest terminal, fingers moving quickly across the display. Every maintenance route was suddenly locked behind administrative authority. She looked back over her shoulder. Someone manually overrode every engineering access point. Nathan walked to the screen beside her. His expression changed as he reviewed the authorization log. Director, he said quietly. These commands originated from your clearance. Vale remained perfectly calm. Temporary containment measures. Daniel laughed once, but there was nothing amused about it. Containment. He pointed toward the ceiling. There are families sleeping on this station. They are secure. Without oxygen, nobody is secure. Another alarm sounded. Somewhere beyond the laboratory wall, thick emergency bulkheads slid into place, cutting entire sections of the station away from one another. Claire finally forced open a maintenance map. Several life support nodes had already gone dark. Daniel, she whispered. If circulation does not restart before the next pressure drop. She stopped before finishing the sentence. She did not need to. Daniel already understood. He grabbed his battered toolbox from the floor. Opened the door. Vale calmly folded his hands. Your observation period is incomplete. Daniel stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. His eyes were bloodshot, his breathing uneven, his balance unsteady from exhaustion, yet his voice stayed remarkably level. This experiment is over. Not until I have my answer. Daniel frowned. Answer to what? Vale finally revealed the question that had driven every decision since Daniel arrived. Every known intelligent species eventually becomes incapable of making rational moral choices when deprived of neurological recovery. I wish to know when humanity reaches the same point. Claire stared at him in disbelief. You trapped hundreds of people just to prove a theory? Vale corrected her without emotion. To verify one. Daniel slowly shook his head. You are waiting for me to break. Vale gave a slight nod. Eventually, you will stop thinking about everyone else. Survival always becomes personal. Daniel remained silent for several long seconds. Then he quietly asked, "How many people are asleep right now?" Nathan checked the station roster. 412. Any children? Nathan hesitated before answering. Yes. Daniel closed his eyes for one brief moment. When he opened them again, the fatigue was still there, but so was something stronger. He looked at Claire. "Find me another way out." She scanned the emergency schematics until one narrow blue line appeared behind the laboratory wall. There is an old maintenance conduit. It bypasses security doors, but nobody has used it in years. Daniel picked up his flashlight. That is good enough. Vale motioned toward station security. Two officers immediately moved to block the hidden access hatch. Daniel did not charge them. Instead, he grabbed a portable nitrogen cylinder sitting beside the wall and rolled it across the polished floor. The heavy tank struck an emergency sensor, triggering an automatic safety partition that slid down between the guards and the hatch. Before anyone realized what had happened, Daniel pulled open the maintenance panel, squeezed into the narrow passage, and disappeared into the darkness with his toolbox in one hand. Claire followed as far as the opening allowed. "Daniel," she shouted, "you have maybe 20 minutes. His voice echoed back through the cramped tunnel. "Then I guess I cannot afford to fall asleep." Behind them, Nathan stared at Marcus Vale in complete silence, because for the first time since meeting the human engineer, he realized the experiment had already failed. Daniel was no longer trying to survive. He was trying to save everyone else. The maintenance conduit narrowed until Daniel had to crawl on his hands and knees, dragging the heavy toolbox behind him 1 inch at a time. Every movement echoed through the hollow walls of Orpheus Station. Sweat dripped from his forehead despite the cold air rushing through the ventilation pipes. His wrist display flashed again. 20 minutes had become 17. Claire's voice crackled through the radio. "I have your route. Stay on the blue conduit until you reach junction 12. Then climb 30 feet to the primary oxygen manifold." Daniel answered after a long pause. "Say that again." Claire frowned. "Daniel, I heard every word." He rubbed his eyes. They just disappeared for a second. Nathan's voice joined the channel. "That was a micro-sleep." Daniel let out a quiet breath. "I was asleep? Only for a few seconds." Nathan hesitated. "You continued crawling during it." Daniel stopped moving altogether. The thought unsettled him more than anything else had. "You were telling me I kept working while I was unconscious?" Your body completed a learned motor sequence. Your brain briefly disconnected, but your procedural memory continued the task. Daniel laughed softly, although there was no humor in it. "That is not comforting." Another voice suddenly interrupted the transmission. "Marcus Vale. Calm. Controlled. On the contrary, Mr. Walker. It is fascinating." Daniel immediately knew Vale had overridden the communication network. "Get off my channel." "Why?" "We are finally reaching the interesting part." Daniel kept crawling without responding. Vale continued anyway. "You believe you are making rational decisions. The evidence suggests otherwise. Your consciousness is fading, yet your body continues following old habits. You are no longer choosing. You are simply executing." Daniel reached the base of a vertical maintenance ladder and looked up through the darkness. The climb seemed twice as tall as Claire had described. His vision blurred again. For an instant, he saw sunlight spilling through the hatch above him instead of maintenance lights. He heard Lily laughing somewhere overhead. "Daddy, hurry up." He gripped the ladder so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Not real," he whispered. "Not real." Claire heard him. "Daniel, stay with me. Tell me where you are." He looked at the junction marker bolted to the wall. The letters refused to stay still. He blinked twice before finally reading them. "Junction 12. Good. Keep talking." He climbed one rung, then another. Halfway up the ladder, his foot slipped. The toolbox swung hard against the wall before he caught himself with one arm. Metal clanged through the shaft. He remained hanging there for several seconds, breathing hard. "Daniel," Claire shouted. "I am here," he answered between breaths. "Still here." Nathan suddenly interrupted again. "Claire, I found something." Keyboard clicks filled the channel. The oxygen failure was not caused by the magnetic storm. Daniel froze on the ladder. "What?" Nathan's voice became noticeably quieter. "Someone disabled the backup circulation system nearly an hour before the storm arrived." Silence followed. Then Claire asked the question Daniel no longer needed answered. "Who authorized it?" Nathan did not respond immediately. Finally, he said, "Marcus Vale." Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them again, the timer on his wrist had dropped to 14 minutes. He resumed climbing without another word. Behind him, inside the control center, Nathan turned toward Vale with visible disbelief. "You manufactured the entire emergency." Vale never looked away from the station map glowing across the wall. "I removed variables." Nathan stared at him. 412 lives became variables? Vale answered in the same calm voice he had used since the beginning of the experiment. "History does not remember controlled studies that were abandoned too early." Before Nathan could reply, every display in the control room suddenly changed. One by one, every maintenance route Daniel could have used disappeared from the map. Vale pressed a final authorization command. Deep inside the station, massive security doors began sealing ahead of Daniel's path, while one final system remained unlocked on purpose. It was the only route left to the oxygen manifold, and it led straight through the abandoned reactor corridor that every engineer on Orpheus had been ordered never to enter. Daniel dropped from the maintenance ladder into the abandoned reactor corridor and immediately understood why no one came down there anymore. The lights flickered in uneven bursts, leaving long stretches of darkness between pools of pale white light. Dust floated through the air untouched, proof that nobody had opened these service tunnels in years. His flashlight cut through the silence until it landed on a faded warning sign bolted to the wall. "Emergency access only." Daniel checked his watch again. 11 minutes. He kept moving. Claire's voice returned through the radio. "I finally have the reactor schematics. Tell me something good." "I cannot." She hesitated. "The oxygen manifold is on the other side of the old reactor chamber." Daniel stopped walking. That chamber was permanently closed, according to the official records. Nathan interrupted. The official records were altered. Vale reopened the corridor last month without reporting it. Daniel slowly nodded to himself. Of course he did. Every step deeper into the corridor made the station quieter. Even the emergency alarms sounded distant now. Then another voice echoed ahead of him. "Daddy." Daniel froze again. Lily stood 20 feet away beneath a broken ceiling light, wearing the same yellow jacket she had worn the day he left Earth. She smiled exactly the way he remembered. "Come on," she said. "You are almost home." Daniel stared at her for several long seconds before lowering his flashlight toward the floor. There were no footprints, no shadow. He closed his eyes. Not real. When he opened them again, the hallway was empty. He forced himself forward without looking back. Claire heard his breathing change. "Another hallucination?" "Yes." "Can you still tell the difference?" Daniel answered honestly. "Most of the time." Nathan quietly said. "That answer worries me more than the hallucinations." Daniel reached the sealed reactor door and pulled away the emergency access panel. Inside sat hundreds of wires feeding into an obsolete manual override. Modern stations would have replaced the entire assembly years ago. Orpheus had simply built newer systems around the old ones. Daniel smiled faintly despite everything. "You never really throw anything away, do you?" His fingers moved automatically across the wiring. Strip, twist, lock, check continuity, repeat. He never paused to think about each step. His hands simply remembered. Then the lights came back. The massive reactor door slowly rolled open with a deep metallic rumble. "Nice work," Claire said with relief. Daniel frowned. "I did not finish." "What?" He looked down at the completed bypass circuit. "I do not remember wiring the last half." Silence filled the radio. Nathan spoke first. "Another micro-sleep." Daniel stared at his own hands. During the seconds his conscious mind had shut down, his body had completed one of the most complicated electrical repairs on the station entirely from memory. The realization unsettled him more than the darkness ever had. "I do not like this," he admitted quietly. Nathan answered with unexpected honesty. "Neither do I. We have studied hundreds of intelligent species. None of them can do that." Daniel picked up his toolbox and entered the reactor chamber. The old machinery stretched across the enormous room like the skeleton of some forgotten giant. At the far end, behind two service bridges, the primary oxygen manifold waited. He had almost reached the midpoint when every bridge suddenly retracted into the walls. Metal locks slammed into place one after another, leaving Daniel stranded on a narrow maintenance platform suspended above the silent reactor core. Marcus Vale's voice echoed through hidden speakers. Congratulations, Mr. Walker. You have finally reached the point where instinct is stronger than awareness. Daniel looked across the widening gap toward the oxygen controls. They were close enough to see, but impossible to reach. Then Vale delivered the sentence that changed everything. There is one final bridge, but it can only support the weight of one person. I am curious whether you still believe you are here to save everyone else, or whether you will finally choose to save yourself first. Daniel looked across the gap without saying a word. The final service bridge sat folded against the opposite wall, held in place by a magnetic lock that could only be released from the oxygen control panel itself. Marcus Vale had lied. There was no bridge waiting for him. There was only empty space between the maintenance platform and the manifold that could restore life support to the station. You planned this from the beginning, Daniel said quietly. Vale's voice echoed through the chamber. I planned to remove every illusion. Every intelligent species eventually abandons strangers when survival becomes impossible. I simply wanted to know when humanity would do the same. Daniel slowly set his toolbox on the floor and walked to the edge of the platform. He studied the room instead of arguing. The old reactor was silent, but decades of engineering experience whispered that silent machines always left clues. His flashlight swept across the walls until it stopped on two rust-colored maintenance rails running beneath the suspended platform. They were not part of the reactor. They belonged to an old cargo trolley system that had been abandoned years earlier. Claire, Daniel said, how much weight were those maintenance rails designed to carry? She immediately searched through archived blueprints. Approximately 300 pounds. Good. Nathan sounded confused. There is no trolley connected anymore. Daniel smiled faintly. I do not need the trolley. He opened his toolbox and removed two heavy locking clamps, a length of emergency cable, and an old pulley wheel that he always carried because, as he liked to tell younger engineers, somebody eventually forgets the right tool. Claire finally understood what he intended. Daniel, that cable was never meant to carry a person. Neither was I. He attached the pulley to the rail, secured the cable around his safety harness, and gave it one hard pull. The metal groaned, but held. Vale immediately recognized the plan. Security locked the maintenance rail. Nothing happened. Nathan calmly stepped away from the master console inside the control room. I disconnected your override 30 seconds ago. Vale turned toward him in disbelief. You what? Nathan met his eyes without hesitation. I became a scientist to understand life, not to gamble with it. The communication channel filled with the sound of station security requesting new orders, but none of their commands reached the reactor controls anymore. Nathan had isolated the network. Daniel clipped the final carabiner into place and looked once more at the oxygen manifold hanging across the gap. Claire. Yes. If this works, remind me to buy better cable. She laughed despite everything. I will personally buy it for you. Daniel stepped off the platform. The cable stretched tight, the pulley screamed against the old rail, and he slid across the open reactor chamber with both feet hanging above the dark machinery below. Halfway across, the aging rail shuddered violently. One mounting bolt snapped loose with a sharp crack. The entire line sagged several inches. Claire stopped breathing. Nathan instinctively reached toward the monitor as though he could somehow hold the rail together through the screen. Daniel did not panic. He shifted his weight, steadied the swinging cable, and continued gliding until his boots struck the opposite maintenance deck. He rolled onto the metal floor, breathing hard but smiling for the first time in days. Still works, he whispered. He hurried toward the oxygen manifold, only to stop inches from the control housing. Every manual switch had already been unlocked. Every repair panel already stood open. Daniel stared at the exposed circuitry in complete silence before looking directly into the nearest security camera. You never expected me to fix this, he said. You expected me to find it already fixed. Nathan immediately searched the station logs. His expression changed. Daniel, the manifold was never the real target. Claire looked up from her screen. Then what is? Nathan's voice dropped almost to a whisper. The station database. While everyone has been watching Daniel, Marcus Vale has been uploading every second of this experiment to the Galactic Council as proof that humans become dangerous when deprived of sleep. If that transmission finishes before Daniel can stop it, the entire coalition will believe the lie before anyone ever hears the truth. Daniel looked at the exposed wiring inside the oxygen manifold, then slowly closed the maintenance panel without touching a single circuit. Claire heard the click through the radio and immediately understood. You already know it is a distraction. Yes. Daniel picked up his toolbox again. If I repair this first, Vale gets exactly what he wants. Everyone will remember the oxygen failure. Nobody will question the story he is sending. Nathan's voice came back, urgent now. The transmission is already 92% complete. It is broadcasting to every council archive in real time. Daniel checked the station map on the emergency display beside the manifold. His vision blurred again. The symbols drifted apart before settling back into place. He blinked twice and forced himself to focus. One route connected the reactor chamber directly to the central communications array. It was longer than the maintenance path, but if he moved quickly enough, there was still a chance. Claire, I am here. Can you restore oxygen manually after I stop the upload? She studied the engineering diagrams for only a few seconds before answering. Yes, it will take me about 3 minutes. Daniel smiled. That is all I needed to hear. He turned and ran. Every step felt heavier than the last. The walls shifted in his peripheral vision. Once he nearly turned into a storage room because he could have sworn he saw the front porch of his house back in Colorado. He stopped himself by placing one hand against the cold metal wall. Not home, he whispered. Not yet. Behind him, Claire and Nathan raced towards separate control stations. Nathan bypassed security firewalls while Claire prepared to restore life support the moment Daniel disabled the transmission. Marcus Vale watched everything unfold from the central command room. For the first time since the experiment began, his calm expression faded. He activated every remaining lock between Daniel and the communications array, but Nathan quietly canceled each command almost as fast as it appeared. You are destroying your own career, Vale said. Nathan answered without looking away from his console. No, I am saving my profession. Daniel finally reached the communications chamber with less than 1 minute remaining. The enormous transmitter filled the room with a soft blue glow. Across the main display flashed a single message. Galactic Council upload. 99% complete. Daniel stepped to the terminal, but the screen demanded executive authorization. Vale appeared on a nearby monitor. You are too late. Daniel leaned one hand against the console to steady himself. Maybe. History will remember that humanity loses judgment without sleep. Daniel looked at the camera and quietly replied, No. History will remember who tried to rewrite it. He opened his toolbox one last time. Instead of attacking the transmitter, he reached behind the console and disconnected the external synchronization clock that controlled every outgoing data packet. The upload instantly froze. Not because the evidence had been erased, but because every hidden edit, every missing hour, and every altered medical record suddenly became visible as corrupted timestamps. Nathan immediately transmitted the untouched laboratory recordings, the security logs, and Vale's authorization history directly alongside the incomplete report. Within seconds, the council received the entire truth instead of the carefully edited version. Claire restored the oxygen system exactly as promised. Green status lights spread across Orpheus Station one deck after another. Hundreds of sleeping passengers continued breathing peacefully, never knowing how close they had come to disaster. Security officers entered the communications room moments later. They did not raise their weapons. They simply informed Marcus Vale that his administrative authority had been suspended pending a full council investigation. Vale stared at Daniel in disbelief. You had every opportunity to destroy my work. Daniel nodded slowly. I did not need to destroy it. He looked toward the frozen report on the monitor. I only needed people to see all of it. The room grew quiet. Daniel's knees finally gave out. Claire caught him before he hit the floor. His eyes closed almost immediately. Daniel, she said softly. Stay with me. He smiled without opening his eyes. How is the oxygen? Stable. Everyone okay? Nathan looked across the station readouts before answering. Every passenger is safe. Daniel let out one long breath. Good. That was the last thing he said before sleep finally claimed him. 2 days later, he woke in the medical wing with sunlight from an Earth simulation shining through the window. His first question was not about the investigation, the council, or the headlines spreading across the galaxy. He reached for his watch and asked, Did I miss Sunday again? Claire handed him the communicator with a smile. A little girl's voice filled the room. "Hi, Daddy. I knew you would call eventually." Daniel laughed, apologized, and listened while Lily spent 10 straight minutes telling him about school, her science project, and the neighbor's new puppy. Outside the room, delegates from worlds that had once believed humans were reckless quietly stood in silence. They had spent years measuring strength by biology alone. They finally understood they had been measuring the wrong thing. A human could become exhausted. A human could become confused. A human could even lose track of time. But character was built long before the moment of crisis, and when everything else began to fail, that was the part that remained awake.